I'm still working on different ideas for improving the PCB design for my 486 DLC that I'm working on. If I step back a little bit in time, on my 386DX, I had that split into an upper board and lower board, and here's an example of what that upper board looked like. The lower board had my ISA slots on it, and it connected through some Eurodin connectors. Well, at this point, what I was doing is I was putting in sockets. There's one socket here, there's a socket here, and a socket here for these PSoCs. And again, I'm using these PSoCs to generate signals, do address decoding, and to also copy my ROM into RAM during the system power-up. And that's worked well. You know, I have this 386 upper board, lower board working. I've been able to run it at a pretty good speed. I have all the way to the point where I have FreeDOS booting off of a CF card connected to an IDE interface that I built. Okay, so that's great. But I later came up with maybe a smaller version that I would like to build for this 486 DLC or 386DX, either or. And a couple of videos ago, I showed this specific version. The idea is, could I build kind of a core card that would plug into a backplane and then get to all my other devices and peripherals through that backplane? And in this version, I got rid of the sockets that had this PSoC here. And these sockets were really for a small prototype board. This is how I would purchase these, is through a small prototype board. It's the CY8 CKit59. But on that, there would be a little actual chip that is the PSoC itself. And so instead of the entire development kit or development board here, prototype board, I decided, okay, let's try this. Can I just put the PSoC IC itself right on my PCB? And that seemed like a nice step forward. Now, of course, I've not built this yet or ordered these PCBs, so I can't say that this will work for sure, but I suppose in theory, this should be workable. Since this video where I had posted this version, I made a trimmed down version, further trimmed this down, took off some functionality, also made a version where I split this functionality out across 4 different cards. Well, this functionality and a bunch more, but it was 4 cards that would all plug into a backplane. And I'm really not happy with any of the things I've come up with. I'm learning as I go here, but none of these are quite to the point where I'd say, well, that's what I want to order up. I think what I'm going to focus on next is, can I take this specific version of this PCB, scrap these edge connections right here, and really just extend this a little bit and make my ISA slots or other expansion I/O connect into this as a motherboard. So this would be a motherboard, and then I would have slots instead of edge connectors. And through those slots, connect in my VGA, my sound card, my IDE interface, possibly, if I don't put that right on this main board. Now, this board isn't that terribly large, so I think that's all doable. I'm at about 9.6 inches by 5.4. So that seems pretty good. If I could get to something in this 10 by 10, that might be something that is workable. Now, one challenge right now, the way I've got this routed is, it's not completely routed, and that's because of just challenges I was having. I'm using the auto router just for testing purposes, but the auto router was getting a little hung up on trying to get these fully routed for some good reasons. I've got too many components in the way. I just have to do a better prep for the auto router. Again, after I'm done doing some basic testing with the auto router, I will eventually get to manually routing everything. But this is helping me to kind of see what things look like before I get too far and invest all the time in manual routing. Plus, I've yet to come up with the full layout that I really am going to be happy with. But I was thinking, if I go all the way to the point where, I'm going to look at this and the 3D version of this, if I'm going to go to the point where I don't have the sockets, I'm going to put these PSoCs directly on my PCB, I might as well look at other PSoCs in this family. This is the PSoC I was using because specifically it came on the little proto board, and those proto boards are easy to find. at times. I guess sometimes they've been out of stock, but at this point they're pretty easy to find. They were relatively inexpensive. They've probably doubled, if not tripled in price over the last couple of years. But they're still, let's say, sub $20, $15 if you look for them. But if I'm going to go to all that effort of putting this right on the board, I don't need to order those prototype boards, the little dev kits. I can just order just the single PSoC. And if I want to do just the single PSoC and I'm going to do the PCB myself, there's others I can look at in that family. And so what I've done is I've pulled up the manual for the prototype kit and the data sheet for the specific PSoC family. And so if I scroll down through this manual, just to show you, this is what that, basically that prototyping kit looks like. This snaps apart. The left side's a programmer. The right side is the PSoC on this board with, USB connector and an LED and a button and other things like that. Well, I went from the full prototype board to just the PSoC chip itself. And if I come over here, though, and I look at the data sheet for this family, somewhere in the data sheet, let me see if I can find it, there is a list of other PSoCs that are in this family. And I think the one I'm using is this one here. And if I look at this, I can see how many total I/O pins are available, 48. And so I have 3 of these. And some of the way I'm using the pins is redundant between PSoCs. So I'm pulling a lot of address lines, for example, in or out on one or the other PSoC. I've got some signals going between PSoCs because not everything could fit within one PSoC because of only having 48 pins. But if I look, there's this PSoC here. It's in the same family and pretty much everything's identical except for 2 things. And those 2 things would be the package. Instead of a 68-pin QFN, it's a 100-pin TQFP. But when I go to that package instead, I get 72. So I would have 72 total I/O pins usable. And then the question is, well, if I had 72, could I consolidate a couple of my PSoCs and get down to 2 PSoCs, or could I even go further and get down to 1 PSoC? So what I did is I went over into Easy EDA here and I just created a Scratch project. Scratch means for me just temporary throwaway type of thing. And this is what it looked like on my old schematics where I had the entire PSoC prototype kit. And those I later, converted down to just the PSoC chips by themselves, not the whole prototype kit. But if I go and I look at that data sheet and I go to this other package, the 100-pin TQFP, that would be like this right here. Now all of a sudden I have more pins. So the question is, could I take the functionality of a couple of these PSoCs and cram them into a single larger pin or larger package PSoC? So I took all of the signals from all of these and I kind of copied them over, and then I looked at that and said, okay, if I copy them all over, maybe first of all on one PSoC I was using 43 signals, 19 on one side, 24 on the other. So I needed 43 I/O pins out of the 48 total. So I had 5 pins unused. On the other PSoC down here on this one, I needed 40 out of 48. And on this PSoC, I needed 46 out of 48. But you'll notice like I have a lot of address lines, bus address lines. That's much of this PSoC for my shadow functionality. But up here, I also am bringing in a lot of address lines. And so if I consolidate, I don't need 48, or I don't need 43 plus 40 plus 46. I need some subset because there's some duplicates here. So anyways, I brought over all the signals and put them in order and just said, okay, I know I need all of these. That's 44. I know I need all of these. That's 32 more. There's some maybe here I don't need, so they were questionable. I marked them as 10 of those. For example, BLE is the same as A0. So if I have this A0 down here, I don't need BLE up here, or vice versa, whichever. These BE0, 1, 2, and 3, I had a version that was latched and a version that was unlatched. So I probably could use the unlatched for everything and be okay. I might just have to tweak something within the logic inside the PSoCs. But that got me to 86 pins if I counted all of this out of 72 available. So I was over. So then I went and did a little more digging on what am I doing in these PSoCs, and I came down to this where I know I need these 44 signals. I know I need these 19 signals. But all of these signals I kind of shifted over, I don't really need. I went and checked. I have a RAM chip enable and also a chip select, and I looked, and I'm not even doing anything with the chip select, so I don't need that signal. These bus signals, I don't ever do anything with. I don't read them. The only thing I ever do is write out zeros. So I thought, okay, I'll get rid of all of those and have simply a single signal that says I want to output all zeros to address 17 through 30. And I'll just use that to enable a pair of latches that have their inputs tied to ground. So this one signal can generate, maybe 16 zeros onto my bus. I need, I think, 15 here. So anyways, 2 small latches and an output signal here should cover all of these pins, what I was doing with it before. But by the time I pull those out and I keep the rest of this, the 44, the 8, the 19, I'm only at 71. So that fits within the 72 pin package. So I thought that is maybe exciting that I could get rid of all 3 PSoCs and consolidate down to a single PSoC. So then what I did next is I said, okay, well, let's go lay this out. Can I actually make that happen? So I did a layout, and this is what I came up with. And maybe if I want, I could pull up the plain old schematic for a second first. But I came in here and I set up my PSoC. I just simply tied the majority of the pins here just to pin headers. A couple of them I hooked up some switches to, momentary switches, and a bunch of these others. I know this is messy, but all this is a resistor and an LED. So 2 of these 8-bit ports or 16 bits I hooked up to LEDs. And so I've got 16 LEDs, a couple of buttons, and a whole bunch of just connections for headers, a whole bunch of capacitors, and a power connector, a power LED, and a larger bulk capacitor for the board, and then a connection to do programming, and some disconnect jumpers in case if this is in a circuit I have issues. Actually, on this specific board, I don't think I even need this. I probably could take this off, but I'm going to put them on there just to be safe so that when I connect into the programmer, I can disconnect these jumpers and it disconnects the rest of the circuit in case there's something else in the rest of the circuit that messes with these 3 lines that do the programming. But that's really all I should need for this. I can plug in the little programmer, and again, that little programmer is this left-hand side piece. So USB, these 5 wires, just a little jumper, I jump it over to this connection. And so when I built that, it looks like this. Here's that connection. If I go to the 3D version of this, maybe it looks something like this. So I can plug in and program from here. And when you program, it applies power as part of the programming, so I don't need power here. If I'm not programming, I can disconnect that pin header and plug in power here. And I'm just using a screw terminal for power, simple enough. I've got my capacitor and power LED. And these are all LEDs, and these are large LEDs. They're like 1206s for size, but I just got a ton of them. I had bought some that were really inexpensive, so I can just put on some LEDs. I got resistors to go with that. All of those outputs coming from the PSoC. And I just set this up as a 4-layer real quick, just so I could, order up these, solder down one of these, and just do some testing, do some programming. Well, not programming, but basically configure it with whatever logic in it to do something with the LEDs or do something based on the buttons or do other things with any of these pins. I'm exposing all of the pins for I/O for this PSoC here. Pretty straightforward. There's nothing exciting here. I did put all the caps on the bottom, nice and neat. And so these are as close as you can probably get to actually having these connected to VCC and ground. So I've got these right up to the VCC lines and just packed in here real nicely. So I think that's going to work well. If I turn this back around, I think this package I'm going to find easier to solder than the other format that I was looking at. I don't know, it might not make much of a difference, but for this type of thing, I'll use my hot plate underneath it to warm it up a bit, not to fully melt the solder, just to get it a bit warm. And then I'll use the hot air gun on top and solder this down. So I don't think that'll be too bad. But this is what I think I'm going to order up is one of these. So it'll take a little bit to get this in. I'll order up a few of these PSoC chips. I think they're about $20 US. Now, if I'm going from 3 of the other PSoCs at, let's say, at a good price, I got them at $8. This is still a better deal to go one of these instead of 3 of those. But those other PSoCs now seem to be going for $15. So if I'm going from $45 down to $20, that's also a win. So I'm cutting down the total physical space. And maybe to compare, if I come over here on this scratch project where I was just, where did it go? I'll just open up this. Here I had put them over onto a PCB. So that's what 3 of the kits look like. Here's what 3 of the individual PSoCs look like. And here's what one of this new PSoC that would replace these 3 or these 3 look like. So total footprint, this is going to be smaller. It's going to be cleaner. So that's, I think, going to be a nice win. Now for this little test that I'm trying to build this thing here, if I go into what's it going to cost, and let me just double check, this should be all clean. Yeah, so clean DRC. So that's $22, and that's with shipping. So if I just go pull this up for a second and look at the order here, I probably will not order the stencil for this, and that stencil is an option. Let's see, where is that at? Right here. What I found is that ordering the stencil will double my shipping price, and it's $7 for the stencil. If it was just $7 for the stencil, I'd say go for it. But when it doubles the cost of my shipping because it's so large, that's something I don't want to do. So it went from 18 to 34. So I can go without the stencil. This isn't a big deal. I'm not going to do any of the PCBs assembly. I don't need that. Oh, let's just see. Sometimes I'm impatient. I'm going to just hit refresh here. Okay, but looking at this, it's only $7, and this is a special offer, so whatever coupon I've got, but it's not expensive. So it's $7 for 5 of these, so do the math, but not expensive at all. So basically $1.50, not quite, for these PCBs. So I can order up these. I can order up a few of the PSoCs themselves, just in case I manage to mess one up when I solder it on. I do know that this package will not be super easy for me to solder, but it's doable. I've soldered the 286 processor that was like this, which is smaller than this, I think. Well, less difficult to solder than this, but this shouldn't be impossible for me to do. But I can solder that on, use my hot plate, hot air gun, get that soldered on, get the rest of this stuff soldered on, put on these caps on the bottom last, and I should be good to go. And I'll probably order some other PCBs while I'm at it, some just little utility PCBs I've been working on and stuff, so that the shipping really won't be that much more, and I'll have a few other little PCBs that I've been waiting to order. But I think that's what I'm going to do next is, kind of give this a shot, order this up, play with this, see if I can move all the logic, all the configuration from the other 3 PSoCs into this one PSoC. For the most part, it'll be as is. I will have a little bit of a change on those address lines, since the pins will be both input and output, instead of having 2 separate PSoCs, one that does output, one that does input. All of those 3 I can consolidate down, get it onto this one thing. And if this ends up then working, if I can find that I can solder it on and program it the way I want to program it, I could then go all the way back to my board over here and update this. And what I'll do is I'll remove the edge connectors and instead put in some ISO slots. And I will pull out these 3 PSoCs and put in the 1, which will take up more space, but it'll be 1 PSoC. Maybe make this a little bit bigger and put on, let's see, I am missing, I got to put back on some of the I/O stuff that I pulled off. I had pulled off the, the keyboard, mouse, and maybe actually I'll leave that stuff off of here. The keyboard, mouse, SPI, IDE. I'll put all that on a single I/O card that plugs in. None of that is crazy high speed. Maybe, I'm just thinking maybe I will put a VIA versatile interface adapter back on here because the communication to it is a bit higher speed, but out of it is SPI, which won't need as much of a speed factor, and that I could then come out of that for all my SPI connectivity, and maybe run some of those SPI signals through this extension into an I/O type of card that does my keyboard and mouse, but send those signals through just some of these pins down here. Again, this would be a motherboard with sockets, but I would have a slot that has a keyboard, mouse, IDE controller card in it, and those extra signals for SPI I could maybe just run through some of these pins here. The idea is trying to keep all the highest speed stuff here on this card or motherboard and get everything else pulled off onto this other separate card or cards. 1 I/O card, 1 video card, 1 sound card, I think. So three slots into a motherboard. And if I'm looking at the size of this right now, going back to my this, I'm looking at 9.6 by 5.4. I might have to bring that up a couple more inches and bring back on my VIA that I pulled off, but I think I can probably get this done and routed as a 6-layer board would be my goal. Maybe an 8-layer, but I think I can get it done as a 6-layer, because the biggest hang up really has been these PSoCs. And if I consolidate it down to 1, give it enough space around it, I think I'll be sitting okay. And this I left plenty of space, and I don't even remember the size of this. I could probably measure it. And actually, if I just want to go to fabrication, and so that's 90 by 60 millimeters essentially. And so that's about 3.5 inches by maybe 2 inches. Let's see. So yeah, 2.3. So 3.5 by 2.3 inches. So small little board. That's how much space it's going to take up when I get over to this 486, as I'll need that amount of space. But do some rearranging. Easily a pair of these will give me that space, and then I'll free up what a third one would have taken. And I'll have fewer signals to route, since it's really all those address lines are going into 1 PSoC instead of multiple PSoCs, as an example. So that's probably where I'm going to stop this. I at least for me in my mind right now, this seems like a pretty good win to consolidate a bunch of these PSoCs down into a single PSoC. Even though it is a larger PSoC, it's probably going to be an easier format for me to solder. Should have, as a net result, fewer tracks or traces I need to run across my board. Also, this one gives me more space underneath to get all these capacitors under there. So just all around, it feels much better. This is going to slow me down because I am going to now take time to order this. That'll take time. I would be surprised if I could get this before Christmas here in the States. So it might be January, and then I'll have to do some testing with this and then update, if that works out, update my main PCB and get that closer to manual routing. So I might be looking at end of January before I can actually get to something that I'm comfortable saying, I have a version of this that's routed well enough, and something that I would order up, because that board will be a little expensive, especially if I can't get it done in 6 layers, if I have to go to 8. but we'll see how it goes.